There was a version of the relationship where things weren't working. You knew it. On some level, you always knew it. There were days that were harder than they should have been, conversations that went nowhere, a persistent low-grade feeling that something was slightly off, slightly wrong, slightly not enough. And then they left. Or you left. Or it just ended. And something strange happened. The difficult days got quieter in your memory. The conversations that went nowhere started to feel like they had meaning after all. The low-grade wrongness dissolved, and what was left, what remained when the actual relationship was gone, was something that felt larger and warmer and more significant than anything you'd felt while you were inside it. You missed them more after they left than you ever had while they were there. And somewhere in the space between missing them and knowing better, you asked yourself, did I love them wrong? Or am I remembering them wrong? Let's start with what your brain does to a relationship once it ends. Memory isn't a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time you remember something, you're not retrieving a stored file, you're rebuilding it piece by piece from fragments. And that rebuilding process is not neutral. It's edited. Psychologists call this reconstructive memory, the tendency to fill gaps in our recollection with information that fits the emotional story we currently need to tell. And when a relationship ends, the emotional story we need to tell changes dramatically. While you were inside the relationship, the difficult parts were present tense. They were friction you had to navigate today, tension you had to manage this week. They were real, immediate, and they carried weight. Once the relationship ends, those difficult parts lose their urgency. They're no longer something you have to deal with. They recede. They soften. They become part of a story you're telling about the past. And stories need shape, and shape often means smoothing the edges. The good moments don't recede the same way. The warmth, the connection, the specific way they made you feel seen, those are emotionally vivid. Emotionally vivid memories are retained more reliably. So, what you're left with, months after it ends, is a version of the relationship where the best parts are preserved in high resolution and the difficult parts have faded to background noise. This isn't weakness, it's how memory works. But it means the person you're missing isn't entirely the person who existed. It's the edited version. There's a specific mechanism behind this that psychologists call idealization, and it's not unique to romantic relationships. It happens with friendships that end, with parents after they die, with periods of your life after they close. When something is gone and can no longer disappoint you, the brain stops processing it as a threat. The threat monitoring system, which was, while the relationship was active, constantly scanning for danger, for rejection, for the ways things might go wrong, stands down. And in its place, something softer. The parts that were good, now uncontested. Idealization isn't a lie, it's selective memory operating without friction. The frustrating irony is this: if they came back, if the relationship resumed exactly as it was, the things that faded would return. The low-grade friction would be present tense again. The monitoring system would reactivate, and within weeks, maybe days, you'd remember why it ended. This is why going back rarely works the way we hope. We go back to the real person. But we were in love with the edited one. There's something else happening that's even harder to name. John Cacioppo, the loneliness researcher, spent years studying what happens to the attachment system when connection is threatened or lost. What he found is this: the moment of loss, seeing activates the attachment system more powerfully than the relationship itself often did. While you were together, attachment was background, largely satisfied, largely quiet, running in the background like an app you don't notice until it crashes. When the relationship ends, the attachment system doesn't stand down. It surges. It becomes loud, insistent, present in a way it wasn't before. Your brain, registering the loss of connection, begins to signal urgency. find it, restore it, go back. And this surge of attachment, this sudden vivid need, gets mistaken for love. It feels like love. It has all the texture and weight of love. But what it often is the attachment system in emergency mode, doing what it was designed to do, trying to restore a bond that kept you safe. The love was real. But the intensity of what you feel after they leave is often less about who they were, and more about what your nervous system does when connection disappears. There's one more piece. Arthur Aaron, the psychologist who spent his career studying love and identity, developed a concept called the self-expansion model of relationships. His research showed that when we enter a close relationship, we literally incorporate the other person into our sense of self. Their traits, their perspectives, their way of seeing the world, they become part of how we define who we are. When that relationship ends, we lose more than the person. We lose the version of ourselves that existed inside it. The you who laughed differently around them. The you who had opinions you'd never had before. The you who felt capable of things you didn't believe you were capable of alone. That version of you doesn't survive the ending. At least not immediately. And what you're often missing when you miss them most isn't them exactly. It's who you were when you were with them. This is why the grief after certain relationships feels disproportionate. Why you can look back at something that wasn't even that healthy and feel a loss that seems too big for what it was. The loss is real, but it's not just them. It's a version of yourself that no longer has a place to exist. So what do you do with this? Not, how do you stop loving them? That's not the point. But, how do you see clearly enough to grieve what was actually lost, rather than mourning a version that the ending built? The first step is the hardest one, letting the difficult parts back in. Not to punish yourself or them, not to rewrite the story as worse than it was, but to hold the full picture, the warmth and the friction together, the real person rather than the edited one, because grieving the real person is how you actually move. Grieving the idealized version keeps you in a loop. You mourn something that was never quite there. You compare every new person to an image that was half constructed after the fact. You stay in a relationship with a version of someone who, in their actual form, was also complicated and imperfect, and sometimes not enough. The second step is finding the parts of yourself you associated with them, and giving them somewhere else to live. The you who laughed differently. The you who believed certain things about yourself. Those parts weren't created by that person. They were revealed by the safety or the challenge or the particular chemistry of that specific connection. They can be revealed again, in different contexts, by different people. By you alone, if you learn to look for them. You loved them more after they left. That's not a sign that you made the wrong choice, or that you should go back, or that what you had was rarer than you knew. It's a sign that your brain does what all human brains do when something ends. It builds a monument. And monuments are never quite the same as the living thing. The living thing was complicated. It was present tense and imperfect, and sometimes exhausting, and sometimes exactly what you needed. The monument is simpler, cleaner, easier to love. But you can't live inside a monument. You can only visit it. And then, when you're ready, you walk back out into the world where the living, complicated, imperfect things are. Being shared. Psychology for the things you feel but can't explain. If this found you at the right moment, share it with someone who's still figuring it out.